The bell did not ring loudly, but its sound traveled far enough to settle into every corner of Red Willow Crossing, pressing itself into the bones of those who heard it. It was the kind of bell meant for livestock sales and land claims, a bell that carried the weight of transaction, not mercy. Dust hovered in the late morning air, stirred by boots that had walked these grounds countless times for reasons far less shameful than today. The platform stood behind the freight depot, rough-hewn and splintered, raised just high enough for visibility but not dignity. A faded banner hung above it, announcing placement auction. The words chosen carefully to soften the truth. Men gathered in clusters, hands resting on belts or tucked into coat pockets, their eyes sharp with calculation. A few women stood farther back, watching quietly, faces stiff with discomfort or resignation. Beneath the platform, in a narrow, cleared space, stood the women. They were not girls. Every one of them was an adult, legally so, their ages ranging from late teens to well into their 20s. Yet the way they were arranged, lined shoulder to shoulder, hands folded, eyes trained downward, robbed them of adulthood and replaced it with something closer to display. They were Chinese immigrant women, brought across an ocean with promises that dissolved upon arrival. Some had been told they would work in kitchens or laundries. Others had been promised education, stability, wages to send home. All of them had learned the same lesson. Words meant little without power behind them. Each woman wore a simple cotton dress, clean but thin, practical but intentionally unadorned. Their hair was pulled back tightly, braids and buns secured with care, not vanity. Around each wrist was tied a small wooden tag, smooth from handling, inked with a name and a number. Names written by strangers. The auctioneer began his work with efficiency, calling the first woman forward. He did not look at her face when he spoke, only at the paper in his hand. 22, healthy, strong, speaks some English, laundry and cooking experience. A bid was called, then another, a short exchange of coins and nods. The woman was led away, her steps measured, her expression unreadable. It continued like that. Each call stripped something unseen from the air. Hope, perhaps, or the illusion that this was temporary. The women watched one another disappear, swallowed by wagons, contracts, destinations unknown. Some were claimed quickly, others waited longer, their presence growing heavier with every passing minute. At the far end of the line stood Li Xiu. She did not shift her weight. She did not fidget or glance around. She stood still, hands clasped loosely in front of her, shoulders squared in a way that came from years of enduring hardship without allowing it to bend her. At 26, Li Xiu was considered old for this kind of trade. Too old to mold easily, too old to be naive. Her face bore no softness meant to entice sympathy. Instead, it carried something sharper, awareness. Her dark eyes were steady, observant, and unafraid to meet the world as it was. She had crossed the ocean 5 years earlier. She had buried her parents in a village she would never see again. She had worked until her fingers cracked and bled, until exhaustion became a constant companion rather than an enemy. She had learned English not from kindness, but from necessity, picking up words from overheard conversations and sharp corrections. When the second-to-last woman was claimed, Li Xiu knew. She was the last. The crowd thinned almost immediately. Interest faded once novelty was exhausted. Men drifted away, conversations turning to livestock prices and weather forecasts. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing at his paper, then back at Li Xiu with irritation rather than concern. "Final contract," he announced, his voice louder now, as though volume could create demand. "Adult, healthy, speaks English fluently, skilled in domestic and field labor." Silence answered him. The sun burned overhead. A breeze lifted dust around Li Xiu's boots curling against the hem of her dress. Somewhere beyond the depot, a train whistle sounded, long, mournful, indifferent. Li Xiu lifted her chin slightly. She would not beg. She had promised herself that, if she was to be left behind, she would stand with dignity. If she was to be discarded, she would not bow to it. The auctioneer shifted uncomfortably. "No bids?" he pressed. "I know." The voice came from the edge of the crowd, calm, firm, unmistakably human. People turned. A man stepped forward slowly, not pushing past others, not asserting himself with bravado. He removed his hat as he walked, holding it in both hands. His coat was worn but clean, his boots scuffed from honest labor rather than neglect. His face bore the marks of time and grief, lines etched not by cruelty but by responsibility carried alone. His eyes found Li Xiu and stayed there. "My name is Samuel Carter," he said. "I'm a widower. I own a ranch west of the river." The auctioneer frowned. "And what exactly are you bidding for, Mr. Carter?" Samuel did not look at him. His gaze never left Li Xiu. "I'm not buying labor," he said. "I'm offering my name, a place, protection, fair work and fair pay, and the freedom to leave if she chooses." A murmur rippled through the remaining onlookers. This was not how things were done. Li Xiu felt something shift, not hope, not yet, but possibility. Dangerous, fragile, undeniable. For the first time that day, she met a man's gaze without feeling measured. And the world held its breath. The papers were signed with reluctance and confusion, as though the ink itself resisted forming the agreement. The auctioneer hesitated more than once, glancing between Samuel Carter and Li Xiu as if expecting one of them to break the strange calm that had settled over the clearing. But neither did. Samuel's hand was steady as he placed his name where it belonged, and Li Xiu, though she was not asked to sign anything, stood close enough to see the letters take shape, each stroke carrying a weight she did not yet fully understand. Coins changed hands, though fewer than the auctioneer would have liked. The sound of them clinking together felt muted, almost embarrassed, as if even metal recognized the ugliness of the transaction. When it was done, the man cleared his throat and stepped back, eager to move on, eager to pretend this moment would not linger in his memory. Just like that, the platform emptied. The banner fluttered weakly in the breeze. The crowd dispersed in uneven directions, boots crunching over dirt, conversations resuming as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. A few glances were cast backward, some curious, some disapproving, but most people turned away quickly, relieved to no longer be witnesses. Li Xiu stood still, the sudden openness around her feeling almost unreal. For the first time since she had been lined up beneath the sun, there was no one standing behind her, no one waiting to be called forward. The absence was loud. Samuel stepped closer, not invading her space, but close enough that his presence felt intentional. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly, his voice low so only she could hear. "Not gratitude, not obedience. If you decide you don't trust this, you can walk away now." Li Xiu studied his face. She had learned to read men quickly, what they wanted, what they hid, what they promised but never intended to give. This man carried grief openly, like an old wound that had healed wrong but never stopped aching. There was no impatience in him, no expectation of immediate compliance. "Where would I walk to?" she asked. Samuel did not flinch at the question. "Anywhere you choose. I'll give you coin enough to get started." It was not generosity meant to impress. It was an offer rooted in respect, and that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. After a moment, she nodded once. "I will come," she said, "but I will watch." "That's fair," he replied. The wagon waited at the edge of town, hitched to a broad-backed brown horse, whose calm eyes flicked toward them with mild curiosity. Samuel loaded his supplies without hurry, giving Li Xiu space to decide where to sit, what to do with her small bundle of belongings. When she climbed onto the wagon bench, he took the reins without comment, as though this arrangement had always been the plan. They left Red Willow Crossing without ceremony. The road stretched long and uneven, winding through dry land that slowly softened into fields touched by green. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wagon creaked beneath them, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves grounding Li Xiu in the present moment. She watched the horizon carefully, noting landmarks, memorizing directions. Survival had taught her never to travel blindly. Samuel broke the silence only when the sun reached its highest point. "There's water ahead," he said. "We'll stop." At the creek, he dismounted first and handed her the canteen without asking if she wanted it. She drank deeply, the coolness a sharp relief. He turned his back while she did, busying himself with the horse, offering privacy without ceremony. The small courtesy struck her unexpectedly, lodging somewhere deep in her chest. They spoke more as the day wore on. Simple things at first. How long the journey would take. What the ranch required. Samuel explained the work plainly, without exaggeration. Fences that needed mending. Fields that demanded attention. Animals that required patience. "I won't lie to you," he said. "It's hard work." "I am not afraid of work," Li Xiu replied. "I thought as much." By the time the ranch came into view, the sky had begun to soften into evening colors. It was not grand. No white fences or towering house, just solid land, worn buildings, and a sense of quiet perseverance. The house stood a short distance from the barn, its porch weathered but sturdy, its windows catching the last light of day. Samuel hesitated at the door. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed unsure. "My wife died 3 winters ago," he said. "Some things haven't changed since." Li Xiu understood grief that lingered. She stepped inside without comment. The house smelled faintly of wood, dust, and memory. A shawl hung on the back of a chair. A pair of worn shoes rested neatly by the door. Samuel noticed her noticing and looked away, giving her space to take it in. Her room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a wash basin, a window that opened toward the fields. When she set her bundle down, the quiet wrapped around her, unfamiliar and heavy. No shouting, no commands, no eyes watching her every movement. That night she cooked without being asked, not because she owed him, but because she chose to. The meal was simple, but when Samuel tasted it, he closed his eyes briefly, as if remembering a life that had once been full. "Thank you," he said softly. No one had thanked her for feeding them in years. As darkness settled over the ranch, Li Xiu lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of wood, the distant call of night insects. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like a narrowing path. It felt uncertain, and that, she realized, was a kind of freedom. Morning came quietly to the ranch, not with bells or shouted orders, but with light slipping through the thin curtains and the low, patient sounds of animals waking in the barn. Li Xiu opened her eyes slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar calm. For years, her mornings had begun with urgency. Someone else's schedule, someone else's demands. Here the day waited for her instead of chasing her. She dressed quickly and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the scent of grass and earth, sharp and clean enough to sting her lungs. The sky stretched wide above her, pale blue and unclaimed, and for a moment she simply stood there, letting herself feel how open the land was. It unsettled her. Wide spaces always did. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to disappear into. Yet there was also nowhere to be trapped. Samuel was already awake. She found him in the barn, moving steadily between stalls, his motions practiced and unhurried. He acknowledged her presence with a nod, but did not stop what he was doing. That, too, felt intentional, an unspoken message that she was welcome, but not required to prove herself. She watched first, learning the rhythm of the place. When she stepped forward to help, Samuel accepted it without comment. He showed her how to carry feed so it would not spill, how to approach the horses so they would not startle. He did not over-explain or assume ignorance. When she asked questions, he answered them plainly. The work was hard but honest. By midday, sweat dampened the collar of her dress and her muscles burned in a familiar, almost comforting way. Pain she understood. It meant effort, not fear. They ate lunch outside, sitting on the edge of the porch, their shoulders not quite touching. Samuel offered her bread and dried meat, and she noticed that he ate no more than she did. There was no sense of hierarchy in the act, no silent reminder of who controlled the food. In the afternoon, they mended a broken section of fence. The task required coordination, and for the first time, their movements fell into sync, passing tools, pulling wire, setting posts. When their hands brushed accidentally, Samuel pulled back immediately. His expression neutral, respectful. Li Xiu noticed. She noticed everything. As the days passed, routine settled in. She rose early, worked until her body ached, and slept deeply at night. Samuel paid her at the end of the week, placing the coins in her hand without ceremony. The weight of them surprised her more than their value. Wages were not gifts, they were acknowledgement. When they rode into town together for supplies, The stares began. Some people looked openly, their curiosity sharp and unfiltered. Others pretended not to see her at all. A few muttered under their breath. Li Xiu walked beside Samuel with her back straight, her gaze forward. He did not rush. He did not distance himself from her. When a shopkeeper addressed him as though she were invisible, Samuel corrected it calmly. "She's with me," he said. "Her name is Li Xiu." The simple act of speaking her name aloud felt powerful. Not everyone appreciated it. Whispers followed them as they left the store. She caught fragments: speculation, disapproval, warnings framed as concern. Samuel did not respond to any of it, but she noticed the tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared as though preparing for resistance he already expected. That evening, after the animals were settled and the sky began to darken, Samuel spoke again. "You need to know something," he said, leaning against the fence. "People here don't like what they don't understand, and they don't understand this." Li Xiu considered his words. "I'm used to being disliked," she said. "What I am not used to is being defended." Samuel met her gaze. "I won't promise you an easy life here, but I will promise you honesty and safety." She nodded slowly. "That is more than I have ever been offered." Night fell gently over the ranch, the stars bright and unashamed in the open sky. Li Xiu lay in her bed later, listening to the quiet, thinking of the road that had brought her here. She did not know if this place would become home. Trust, she knew, had to be earned slowly, like land broken by hand. But for the first time, the ground beneath her felt solid, and that, she allowed herself to hope, might be enough. The first sign of trouble did not come with raised voices or open threats. It arrived quietly, almost politely, the way danger often did in places that preferred to believe themselves civilized. It began with a man at the edge of the property. Li Xiu noticed him first. She was hanging laundry behind the house when she sensed movement where none should have been. The ranch sat far enough from town that visitors were rare, and those who came usually announced themselves long before reaching the fence. This man did not. He stood just beyond the boundary line, hat pulled low, hands resting loosely at his sides as though he had every right to be there. She did not call out. Instead, she memorized him, the slope of his shoulders, the way his gaze traveled over the land before settling on the house. There was no curiosity in that look, only assessment. When Samuel returned from the far field, she told him, he did not ask how long the man had been there. He did not question her certainty. He simply took the rifle from its place by the door and walked out onto the porch, visible, unmistakable. The man lingered only a moment longer before turning away. Samuel watched until he disappeared over the rise. Then he came back inside, his expression tight. "That was one of the men from the auction," he said. "The one who handled the contracts." Li Xiu felt a familiar cold settle in her chest. "What does he want?" Samuel shook his head. "Control. Or to remind us both that he thinks he still has it." The next weeks confirmed Samuel's suspicion. In town, conversations changed tone. What had once been whispers became pointed remarks. A clerk refused to look at Li Xiu when she spoke. A neighbor suggested, too casually, that Samuel might reconsider the arrangement for the sake of peace. Someone left a note nailed to the fence one morning, its message clumsy and cruel, warning that trouble followed women like her. Samuel tore it down without a word and burned it in the stove. But pressure, like water, finds cracks. One afternoon, a formal notice arrived, stamped with the town's seal. Samuel read it twice before. Handing it to Li Xiu, his jaw was clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. "They're calling a council meeting," he said, "claiming your placement contract wasn't fulfilled properly. That you were misrepresented." Li Xiu read the words slowly. She had learned enough English to understand when language was being twisted against her. "They want me returned," she said. "They want precedent," Samuel replied. "They don't like that I treated you like a person instead of property." For the first time since arriving at the ranch, fear stirred sharply in her. Not panic, she had long outgrown that, but a clear-eyed understanding of what was at stake. She had known safety here was fragile. She had just not realized how quickly others would try to shatter it. The council meeting was held in the same building where land disputes were settled and taxes debated. Wooden benches lined the room. The air smelled of old paper and authority. Li Xiu sat beside Samuel, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Though her pulse beat loudly in her ears, men spoke about her as though she were not there. They cited laws and contracts, terms she recognized as tools rather than truths. When Samuel spoke, his voice was steady, his words measured. He described the agreement exactly as it had occurred. No embellishment, no apology. Finally, one of the councilmen turned to Li Xiu. "Do you have anything to say?" he asked, his tone skeptical, as though already dismissing her answer. She stood, the room stilled, surprised by the simple act. "I was sold without choice," she began. "I was offered protection without ownership. I accepted work, not bondage. I'm paid, I'm free to leave. If this town believes that fairness is a crime, then say it openly." Her English was clear. Her voice did not waver. Silence followed. Not agreement, but discomfort. The council adjourned without decision, postponing judgment. It was not a victory, but it was not defeat either. As they left the building, Samuel glanced at her with something close to pride. "You were brave," he said. Li Xiu shook her head. "I was honest." They rode back to the ranch under a sky heavy with clouds, both aware that the storm had not passed, only paused. Yet as the first drops of rain began to fall, Li Xiu realized something unexpected. She was no longer standing alone, and whatever came next, she would face it not as someone sold, but as someone who chose to stay. The days following the council meeting carried a strange, watchful quiet, as though the land itself were holding its breath. Clouds drifted low over the fields, stretching shadows across the grass, and the air felt heavier than before. Li Xiu worked as she always had, steadily, deliberately, but now every sound carried meaning. The creak of a gate, hoofbeats on the road, the distant bark of a dog that did not belong to the ranch. Samuel noticed it too. He did not say much, but he stayed closer to the house, the rifle never far from reach. At night, the lamp burned longer than usual, its soft glow pushing back the darkness that gathered beyond the windows. They spoke in low voices, not out of fear, but awareness. They both understood that unresolved judgment often invited its own kind of violence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a wagon approached the ranch road. Li Xiu saw it first again. This time she did not wait. "They're coming," she said quietly. Samuel stepped onto the porch as the wagon stopped at the gate. 3 men dismounted, hats low, postures stiff with authority borrowed rather than earned. One of them was the contract handler from the auction. Another was a town deputy. The third was unfamiliar, his expression carefully neutral. "We're here to resolve this matter," the deputy said. Officially, Samuel did not move aside. "Then speak plainly." The contract handler cleared his throat. "The council has reached a decision. There will be no forced removal." His words tasted bitter, even to himself. "However, there are conditions." Li Xiu felt her shoulders tighten. "The town does not recognize informal arrangements," the man continued. "If she remains here, it must be under a recognized household structure. Otherwise, she will be considered unplaced." Samuel understood immediately. "You want control," he said flatly. "We want order," the deputy replied. Silence stretched between them, thick and deliberate. Li Xiu stepped forward. "I will speak," she said. The men hesitated, unused to being addressed directly by someone like her. But Samuel did not stop her. "I was sold once," Li Xiu said calmly. "I will not be sold again. I will not be threatened into submission. If you want order, then recognize this. I work here by choice. I am paid, I am protected, and I will not leave under fear." The unfamiliar man studied her closely, something shifting behind his eyes. He turned to Samuel. "Is that true?" Samuel's voice did not waver. "Every word." The men exchanged looks. They had expected resistance, but not unity. Power thrived on division, and they found none here. At last, the contract handler spoke again. "There is one alternative, a permanent one, if both parties agree." Li Xiu already knew what it was. The words still landed heavily. Marriage, not ownership, not erasure, but a binding that the town could recognize without dismantling its fragile sense of control. It was not fair, it was not clean, but it was real. The men left without demanding an immediate answer. That night, Li Xiu and Samuel sat at the table long after the food had gone cold. The lamp flickered softly between them. "I won't ask this of you," Samuel said at last. "I won't trap you in another arrangement just to make others comfortable." Li Xiu looked at her hands, at the faint scars that told the story of every road she had walked. "All my life, decisions were made for me," she said quietly. "This one would be mine." He met her eyes. "Only if you truly want it." She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the land, the fields she had worked, the animals she had cared for, the horizon that no longer felt endless and empty. This place had given her something she had not known how to name before. "Joyce," she turned back to him. "I do not choose safety out of fear," she said. "I choose partnership, respect, a life built, not owned." Samuel's breath caught. He nodded once. "Then I offer you my name," he said, his voice thick. "Not as shelter, but as equal ground." The town witnessed the union weeks later, not with celebration, but with quiet acknowledgement. Some watched with skepticism, others with reluctant respect, a few with genuine warmth. Li Xiu stood tall beside Samuel, not hidden, not diminished. When her name was spoken, it was spoken clearly. Li Xiu, but she did not lose herself to it. Seasons passed. The ranch thrived not because the world became kinder, but because two people refused to let it make them small. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then free. The house filled with warmth that did not erase grief, but lived beside it. Sometimes Li Xiu thought of the auction platform, the dust, the silence when no one bid. She remembered the fear, and then the voice that interrupted it. I know. She had not been chosen because she was last. She had been chosen because she stood, and in the end she was not saved by a name. She claimed one on her own terms and built a future where dignity, once nearly lost, stood unbroken beneath an open sky.